Hey everyone, we're excited to get this webinar started. Thanks for being here today. My name's Nick Child. I'm the Director of Client Experience here at Harris Federal Law Firm. We're really excited to be here with you today and talk about federal disability retirement for military veterans. This is questions we get a lot. That's why we wanted to put this webinar on. We have a lot of military veterans that work in the federal government, and their disability retirement has some unique aspects of it that they need to be aware of. So that's why we're putting this one on today. Very excited to have Ashley Withers here with you. She is a client education consultant here at Harris Federal Law Firm. And also Grant Ostrander, our Director of Operations. Grant is a chartered federal employee benefits consultant. He's also a certified federal retirement consultant, and he has a life insurance license. So he's has a very unique perspective that he brings, and a lot of information to walk through with you. Grant's been with Harris Federal for 17 years now. He's been a part of helping over 6,000 federal employees throughout his time here. So this is, two of the best resources I can think of to walk you through this benefit, and especially in the context of military veterans. So before we get started, I want to point your attention to the chat box in the bottom right corner. I'll put up a graphic here so you can see what that looks like. This is a great place for you to ask questions. We have team members here live trying to get to those questions as quickly as we can. So ask those throughout the webinar, and we'll get to those. We can't get to yours throughout the webinar. Just give our office a call. We'd love to set up a free consultation with you and walk through your specific situation and let you know what your future could look like on disability retirement. So with all that being said, Ashley, Grant, let's get started.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you for having us here. I'm Ashley Withers. I'm a client education consultant here at Harris Federal, and I'll be talking today with Grant Ostrander. He's the Director of Operations here. Grant, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Today in this webinar, we're going to go over federal disability retirement and how it is a little bit different for military veterans. So we'll go over what disability retirement is, the benefits, and how much it pays out. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how there can be additional benefits for veterans applying for disability retirement. Okay, so let's just jump into the federal disability retirement benefit. Grant, can you give us just some information on who this benefit applies to?
Absolutely. Federal disability retirement can help anybody who is a career federal employee who's struggling with an illness or injury that's keeping them from being fully successful at work. It can't be something that's short-term. It's got to be something that's considered permanent. And for this specific law, permanent means anything that's going to persist longer than a year.
Right. And this is something that has to have arisen while they're in federal service or worsened.
That's right. The cause of the injury doesn't have to be work-related at all. It could totally be just getting sick of something and having an illness, or it could be an injury you had from, college athletics, or, obviously in the military. But
right.
It can't, the actual disability can't exist prior to employment in its current state. So it either has to have arisen while employed or worsened to the point that it's causing a problem with your ability to perform your job while you were employed there.
Exactly. And we'll talk a little bit about where this benefit comes from. So this is a benefit that is already built into the retirement system for federal employees. Specifically, there are just a few employees that are still under the civil service retirement system. But for the most part, this is for federal employees that are under the FERS system.
Right.
This benefit is paid out through the OPM. That's the office that adjudicates this benefit. So while any federal employee that has 18 months of service with an injury is eligible, this is a benefit that you do have to apply for and be approved for.
Right. And not only do you have to apply for it, a lot of times federal agencies are really bad about informing their employees that it even exists. And half that's because those HR offices aren't even familiar with it. So
Exactly.
It exists for all of them. But they do have to actually know about it and put together their applications. And not only do you have to prove your case and with the burden being on the applicant, you have to actually understand what you're applying for, because it's not as easy as just sending in a piece of paper and getting a benefit.
Right.
So you have to know whether or not it's actually going to be good for you and be something that makes sense for you at this stage in your career. And that's one thing we always want to try to highlight for people is kind of what is the benefit that you get, and is it worth it for you?
Right. So let's go through some highlights of this benefit. First off, we're going to talk about the monthly annuity. So for federal disability retirement, once an employee is approved for this benefit, the first year they will receive 60% of their high 3 salary. And every year following that, they will receive 40% of their high 3 salary. And it is important to note that this benefit is subject to federal income tax. Grant, can you give us a little bit of information on what the high 3 average is? Because this is not something that's just their annual salary.
Right. And this causes as much confusion as you could, as anything that's involved with federal employee benefits. But it's got a simple definition, and you have to kind of say it out loud to yourself a few times before it makes any sense. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that is the highest 36 consecutive months of your basic pay. A lot of times people will say things like, well, what about overtime? And really that overtime is excluded for most employees unless it's a part of your regular salary. And if you think to yourself, well, I don't know if it is or not, then it probably isn't. Mm-hmm. If you're in federal firefighting or law enforcement, there's some things that are mandatory, and those are the things we're really referring to. And so if you're one of those employees, especially special provisions employees, you already know that that's part of your salary. So if you've got a lot of questions about whether or not your overtime counts, likely it doesn't.
Right.
But the truth is, this all gets calculated by OPM, and you can't change it. The good news is, though, if you've been on workers' compensation, they're still counting your actual salary that you would have received, not your compensation rate in that high 3 there. So if that's part of the highest 36 consecutive month period, you're not losing out on that. That calculation will stay the same until your 62nd birthday. And on your 62nd birthday, that benefit gets recalculated as if you had just continued working at your present position until that date.
Right. So another benefit of receiving disability retirement benefits is that you do continue to accrue years of service while on this benefit. So right here, we have just a good visual representation of the benefits that you can receive. The first year being that 60% and every following year being 40%. And this is such a big deal for employees who are unable to reach the retirement age. You will continue to accrue years of service on this benefit. And accruing federal years of service is such a big deal for employees who are unable to reach the age 62. And another big benefit of disability retirement benefits is that you are able to continue working in the private sector while on this benefit. Grant, can you talk a little bit about the parameters of working in the private sector?
Sure. This is a really big deal. And I think that, most of our clients and most people we talk to, they have a career with the federal government, and their plan was to continue to work in that career until they retired. So this unexpected illness or injury that's impeding their ability to continue working is a big change. And so they haven't thought about what they might do somewhere else. But truly, most of our clients find an opportunity that maybe they always wanted to do something or thought they'd be good at something, but didn't feel like they could earn the same kind of compensation, or certainly now that they've got an injury and illness, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the ability to do it at a level that would provide an income for them that keeps them in a stable spot. But with between 40 and 60% of their salary being paid through the retirement benefit, the disability retirement, there's an opportunity to do something in the private sector that fits inside their medical restrictions, that perhaps they've always wanted to do or always had a talent for, and there's the ability to earn up to 80% of your federal salary in a private sector job. And so we see folks that are get into real estate or get into teaching, and there's a lot of people that have special skill sets that are only taught by the government, especially law enforcement guys that get snapped up by consulting groups because they have a special skill set. And so we see a lot of folks find good, sustainable employment that fits in their medical restrictions, and maybe they only work part-time, but they don't need a full-time salary anymore because almost half of their compensation is being paid paid through that retirement benefit. So it is a massive ability that this doesn't end your earning ability.
Right.
It just supplements it and helps you take the next step in your retirement, or in your career rather, on your way to a full retirement once you reach that age.
Exactly. And just to be specific, federal employees are able to make up to 80% of what their former position is currently paying. If you look on this next slide, here is a good representation of what you can earn while receiving disability retirement benefits as well as income from the private sector. And you'll see that you are able to potentially make more than you were receiving just in your federal position.
Yeah, and we touched on how important it is to continue to accrue credible years of service. But this next slide really kind of talks about that and gives you a visualization. For some people, you're in your mid-50s or even pressing into a minimum retirement age or late 50s, and you look at it and you say, well, hey, this just gets me a couple more years and gets me the last push to age 62 when I would have reached my full retirement age. But for other people, they might be in their 20s or 30s or early 40s, and they're a long way away.
Right.
And so the idea of what my retirement might be after 10 years of service is pretty small. But if you look at it, this chart here, this little graph, you see that if you're age 40 when you get on this, it's going to add 22 years of creditable service, giving you a total career of 32 years. And that's massive. So I can't stress enough how much that means to somebody in the long term, because once we hit our 60s and 70s and our earning ability starts to decline, the more stability we can have in that last bit of retirement, when we can't go out and earn at a job as easily as we could when we were younger, that stability means a whole lot. So raising the long term is sometimes even more important than those years between 40 and 62. So I think that's something that needs to be kind of understood by everyone, just so that they know what they're looking at.
Right. And the difference here is receiving 1% on your regular retirement versus that 1.1% for having over 20 years of service, which can make it a big difference.
Right. And you only get that if you're 62, and this benefit does that for you. It takes you to 62 to get that 1.1. You have to have
Right.
over the 20 years, and you have to be 62 when it gets calculated. And this benefit does that. If you've hit 20 years by the time your 62nd birthday rolls around, this benefit gives you that bonus.
So let's jump into the different qualifications for disability retirement. Specifically, employees need to have a medical condition, as we stated earlier, that has either arisen in federal service or worsened. Specifically, it needs to be a medical condition that inhibits an employee from continuing to complete at least one of the major functions of their current position. So while you don't need to be completely, totally disabled from working, you just need to be unable to complete one of the tasks or functions of the position that you're currently holding. Grant, can you talk a little bit about the difference between total and occupational disability?
Absolutely. Total and occupational disability are simple concepts, but it's not common language. So a lot of people, when they're considering a disability, they just equate federal disability and Social Security disability. And those
Right.
two things are really, really different. Social Security disability is available to anyone who's paid into the Social Security system enough and becomes totally disabled. And their criteria is a high standard. They require you to show that you're not capable of what they call gainful employment activity. And that's a really, really high threshold. So you have to show that you're basically incapable of any real job at all.
Right.
Whereas with federal disability retirement, theirs here is what's called an occupational disability. And this is important because it specifically relates to each person's individual job. Because that definition up there you read said a failure to be able to complete at least one of the major functions of the current position, all we're saying is, do you have a medical condition that prevents you from doing that specific job? Not any job, not some other job, but that job. It then becomes incumbent on your agency to be able to show that they have another job that's equivalent that you can do or can transfer to. And if they don't have that, which most agencies don't, then the disability can be granted. So when we talk about occupational versus total, you may be totally disabled, which is a much higher burden and should qualify you for the federal disability. But you may also only have a disability that affects your job, not any job. And let me give you a perfect example. Law enforcement agents that carry a firearm have a very high standard for being able to qualify with that firearm. And so if they have a medical condition that requires them to take any medication that's a narcotic or an antidepressant, they're automatically disqualified from carrying their firearm, which then makes them automatically disqualified from their position as a law enforcement agent. So you can see there that person might physically be able to do all kinds of things, and that includes playing pickup basketball with friends. But if they are suffering from a depression condition and the doctor puts them on an antidepressant, that can disqualify them immediately and put them into an occupationally disabled status, which would make them eligible for this benefit.
Exactly. And just to reiterate, this medical condition does not need to have been caused by your current employment.
That's right.
Just needs to have arisen, or if you do have that pre-existing conditions, like if you are a veteran, just something that's worsened during your time as a federal employee.
Yeah, and worsened to the point where it actually causes that inability to do your job.
Right, any kind of service deficiency. And you'll see here on the right of this slide just some common examples that we see here at our firm of medical conditions that can cause those service deficiencies. We're going to touch on some different benefits that veterans may be eligible for. So in regard to federal disability retirement, we're going to talk about military buyback, military retired pay, as well as VA disability pay. So we'll jump in right now to talk about military veterans specifically and how this benefit can look a little bit different. Like we mentioned, veterans that were injured during active duty have conditions that may have worsened over time. So a veteran could be receiving an 100% VA disability rating while they're employed by the federal government. However, when they have an injury that's worsened over time that now causes them a service deficiency that makes them unable to perform their federal makes them unable to work in their federal position, they are now eligible for federal disability retirement.
Right. And this is important because I think a lot of veterans, especially a lot of federal employee veterans that we talk to, maybe did their 4 years, in enlistment and reached an E4 and had a good service career. Then they rolled out on a voluntary discharge. They become federal employees under a preference point system. They take a job with the federal government. Maybe they have a skill set they learned in the military and they're in law enforcement, or maybe they work for the Postal Service or wherever. And those 4 years they spent in the military kind of get lost because it's not enough to have reached a full retirement, and it's kind of a small amount. But it's important for them to understand that they can buy those years into their FERS retirement. And it's not as expensive as you might think. You only have to pay the deposit amount that you would have paid into FERS had that service time been under the government system. And so for a lot of folks in that situation I just described, where they got 3 or 4 years in the military, it's a pretty small amount, especially when you consider that it's going to add a year of service for every year you spent in the military.
Right.
And that's going to equate to 1% of your high 3 for the rest of your life from 62 on. So you might find a situation where it costs $1,500 to buy your service back, and that is going to equate to $1,500 a year for a 25-year period of your life. And so that, by most standards, that's a pretty good investment to get a 25 times return on your money. So when we get to military buyback, that's one thing I think that we offer to people, is the ability to help them understand when it's good and when it's not a good idea to buy their buyback.
Right.
And while we're never going to buy somebody's time for them, that's not our role. It is important that that it's considered by any veteran whether or not it's a good decision. So that's something that we always want to stress. Like, hey, have you bought it back? And if you're going to buy it back, you have to do it before your retirement is finalized.
Exactly.
If it gets finalized, you can't do it anymore.
Exactly. And this must be paid back, like Grant said, paid back in full prior to separation. So not necessarily by the time you apply for disability retirement, but by the time you're approved or separated from the federal government. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about military retired pay. This can be really important for federal employees because there's no offset with federal disability retirement. So you are able to receive your military retired pay as well as the federal disability retirement benefits. You're not able to buy back that time if you're already receiving military retired pay. However, you do have the option to waive that if you'd rather buy back that military time.
This is one of those math equations that we try to walk through with people when we can. But the important thing to note here is that everybody's situation is different, and a lot of this depends on what their rank was and how many years of service they had in the active duty, and then also what their job is now and what their earnings are in the federal sector. So really, this comes down to which benefit is better for you and which version of this is better for you, and that's something we're happy to walk through and kind of explain to people on an individual basis. But it's not something you can explain in a webinar because you have 100 people, you have 100 different scenarios, and so last thing we want to do is tell anybody, oh, you should or shouldn't do this, because it's going to depend on your situation.
Exactly. And every veteran's situation can be so different. And another thing that veterans want to consider is if they're eligible or receiving VA disability pay.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I would say a large number of our clients that are disabled have a VA disability claim. And whether it's a small disability percentage or 100% disabled from the VA, it does provide a tax-free payment to a veteran who sustains some kind of long-lasting injury or illness as a result or during their time in the military. The good news is there's no offset. So if you're currently receiving a VAD payment, that doesn't change anything. Nothing happens with the disability retirement or with your VA payment. So you can continue to receive those concurrently and without having any kind of offset.
Exactly. So this is another way you can just maximize these annuity payments. A lot of veterans may be eligible for different military benefits as well as the ability to apply for federal disability retirement.
I think the fact that those things can be based off of the same injury is important. And we talked about that earlier already, I know, but I just want to reemphasize how important it is to understand that it could be the same knee that you've got a VA disability claim for that later worsens during your federal career and can be the reason that you get a disability retirement.
So now we want to go over an example federal employee so we can go over a breakdown of his benefits. So this is John. He's 47 years old. His high 3 average salary is $60,000. He's a letter carrier with the U.S. Postal Service, and he's worked there for 15 years. John also has 10 years of military service, and he is married with no children. So specifically for John, he injured his knee while serving in the military, and he has received an 80% disability rating from the Veterans Administration. His injury worsened while in federal service, and he underwent a surgery, but he was never able to return to full duty, and the post office is unable to accommodate his medical restrictions. Grant, can you go over that monetary breakdown for John?
Sure thing. And obviously, all names and information have been changed to protect the innocent here. But, I've probably spoken to a few hundred people where this is almost their exact situation. I mean, in 17 years of doing this, I've spoken with thousands of people, but this one is so common, and there's tons of other examples that are a little different here or a little different there, but this is a really, really typical type of call that we get. As we go to this next slide, what we're going to start to see is how these graphs play out in this type of a situation. So in John's situation, his high 3 average is $60,000, as we said, and that's that first block there. It's the biggest. 100% of his pay is $60,000. That first year on disability, he'd qualify for 60% of that number, which is $36,000. After the first year, it drops to the 40%, and that's $24,000, and he would receive that on all the way to his 62nd birthday. The total benefit from John's disability retirement annuity in that 15 years is $372,000, in addition to the extra 15 years of creditable service.
Right.
Okay, so that's the core benefit itself, what it would actually pay. Keep in mind, you could just stay on your health and life insurance if you want to through the federal government. So those are other benefits that come along with it, but this is the raw payment.
Exactly.
Now, If you add in his earning capacity in the private sector and go to this next slide, what you see is he still has his original $60,000 basic pay or high three. And then after that, you see that same 60% block, that's $36,000 on the bottom in blue. And then above it in purple is the 80% of his job's pay that he can earn in a private sector position. And 80% of his pay is $48,000. So during that first year, his total would be $84,000 potential, which is obviously 40% over his actual high three number. And then after that first year, when it drops to 40% on the annuity plus the 80% earning capacity, that's $72,000, which is 20% over his high three earnings. And his potential private sector income during that 15-year period is $720,000. So the last bit of information that we've got for John is actually his VA disability income. And so when we look at this next chart, this is a standardized VA disability chart for an 80% disability rating. He doesn't have any dependents. He is married. So his monthly payment for his VA disability rating is $1,926.43. And because we like to be particular down to the decimal here, we've got some interesting numbers that start jumping in for us. So here's the chart again where we've added the final benefit piece here, the VA disability payments, which for him are $23,117 a year.
And that stays the same every year, correct?
That one's constant. Yeah, that doesn't change. It doesn't go down, doesn't go up. It's just what he has. Now, if his disability rating from the VA were to increase, we'd go back up to that chart and watch it climb up as the 90% or the 100% disability rating came in. So that could change, but without him taking further action to increase that disability rating, it's going to stay constant. And we just add that to his federal disability retirement annuity, his earnings capacity, and then put that VA bit on top there. And what you see over this 15-year period between his age 47 and age 62, when he hits his full retirement age, is that the disability retirement benefit will pay him $372,000. He could earn up to $720,000 in a private sector job, and his VA disability rating will pay him $346,757, and bringing us to this grand total of $1,438,757, which comes out to just under $96,000 a year. That would be the total kind of package potential, and up until his 62nd birthday. One other thing to note here is that because he's adding those additional 15 years of service onto his existing service record, that would give him a 30-year civilian career. If he chose to buy his military time, that would put him at 40 years total on his credible service, which means on his 62nd birthday, he would be entitled to the full retirement of a 40-year career, which for him would actually go up. He'd get the bonus 10%, and he would have a 44% annuity for the rest of his life in addition to his VA payments.
Wow, thank you, Grant. I think it's really important to see the way that benefit plays out and the way that those different benefits can just be added on to one another to see how much security that can provide a federal employee who's unable to make it to that age 62. So just as we wrap up, this is a lot of information that we've gone over. We will be posting this webinar to our website for you just to watch again and kind of go over this. But just to touch on some key points that we talked about. So the federal disability retirement benefit does provide a monthly income after approval, and it does go up to age 62 when you would flip over into your regular retirement. You also earn creditable years of service while on disability retirement, and you're able to work in the private sector and earn up to that 80% of what your previous federal position is currently paying. And these veteran benefits can work with disability retirement to maximize that income in the short term and in the long term through regular retirement. We will be here for the next several minutes in this chat. Please feel free to ask any additional questions that you may have, and we are happy to help. Please also contact our office if you have any additional questions or believe this is a benefit that you may be eligible for, and we'll set up a free consultation for you. Thank you so much again, Grant, for all this information. Thank you for being here with us today.
Absolutely. And I just want to re-emphasize that this stuff is complex, and if you're not used to dealing with it, it can seem overwhelming, but don't be intimidated. Just give us a call. We're happy to walk through it with you.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Back to you, Nick.
All right, thanks, guys. Hopefully, you can see that military veterans have some unique options available to them for federal disability retirement, and it's something that you really need to take into consideration as you apply for it and think about what your future looks like on it. Like I said, Grant and Ashley are two of the best, and you know, there's no one better to get this type of information from. So very thankful to have them here to talk to you today. We're going to keep the webinar open here for another 10 minutes or so to take any of your questions as they come in. If we're not able to get to your questions today, please give our office a call and schedule a free consultation so that we can walk through your benefit options with you and really guide you towards what the best future for you is. That's not a sales pitch, I promise. We offer those for free just so that people can understand what their options are, and you know, hopefully we can help them go through that whole process. Very thankful to have everyone here today. I highly recommend that you check out our YouTube channel that's full of resources just like this. We put these webinars on a monthly basis, if not bi-weekly basis. So always putting new information like this out there. So check all that out. And like I said, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and hear from us today. So we look forward to seeing you next time. And with that, we'll wrap it up.